So many of us know what the abuse is like, what it's like to be neglected, what it's like to have people around you all the time that are indifferent to your suffering and even contribute to your suffering, and then hide that contribution. And in a very deceitful, manipulative way, we realize looking back that, we had people in our family that were so envious, they could not bear to see us do better than them. And they hated the attention, they despised the attention that we just naturally got. It's not like we were trying to get all this attention. It just was the result of the mark that God put on us since we were born, like Jeremiah talks about, that God knew him in the womb. You know what I'm saying? So we've been marked out and predestinated, and that mark is a shine that the enemy tries to suffocate and extinguish and put out. And before we even got old enough to even be able to compute what was being done to us, we of course were entered into a competition game over the attention of others. And I've talked about my father, who was a hardworking man, an old school guy, would work 60 hours a week and, had all the toys and, grew up and, was born in the late 40s, definitely a boomer, and just completely cookie cutter, shaped by the culture and shaped by the times, and everything was easier for them. You know what I'm saying? But it's the grandstanding and the grandiosity and the pride and, the refusal to pass that knowledge and information onto your children. The neglect that's deliberate, that's infantile and immature, that is meant to keep the cords of control on you your whole life. And even when you get away, there's still this injury and damage that they've caused that they don't ever clean up. They make you clean it up and blame you for it. And you have to, play this role and act and perform as if you've, done what they're saying. And it's to that extent where they suck you into their fantasy. And their grandiosity doesn't allow them to see the reality that, you're living to cater to and getting other people to cater to a fantasy and a delusion. The delusion is always the same. When you get caught, you're a professional victim. And furthermore, when you're not caught, you want to be a hero and a savior, but when there's no opportunity and someone outshines you, just naturally speaking, you turn to a collapse and control game. And you turn to withholding, ghosting, vanishing, doing under what's required, in a passive-aggressive, envious way to restrain the development. And this is what, my family decided to do to me. And of course, the setups to be put in painful situations with no regard and with the intent of getting a bad reaction. It's like when the narcissist sees other people paying attention to you and loving you and enjoying you, instead of being an adult, developed, emotionally secure person, they see it as a threat to the attention. And in my case, my mom would try to work on me to get me to attack my dad, by making victimhood comments all the time in private to me. So it wasn't done in front of others. It was always this idea that I needed to save her and, rescue her from my father. And the message was communicated to me in many, many various manipulative and deceitful game-playing ways, using me to supply the support for the insecurity that was there because there was so much denial and a disregard for ownership and taking responsibility. The narcissist will take responsibility for things that are successful that they haven't done or accomplished and steal it from you and take ownership of it, breaking your boundaries and damaging your connection and attachment to those things, and then hijacking the proper use of something and contending over it just to waste it and destroy it, and so that you don't have the support, so that you don't have that stability. And so it's all about the destabilization process. This is their support and love. It's to undermine, it's to sabotage, it's to not let you have better, be better, or succeed, because it's a threat to their standing in life. And they're banking on the narrative that they've sown for years. They are depending on the lies. And it's become like a high wall that has, bulged out and is ready to collapse in an instant, suddenly. And this is what happens when, you build your life on deceit and manipulation and lies and performing and acting and pretending. And the pretend game is just to support the fantasy. It's just to support the delusional thinking and the grandiosity where they think they're untouchable. They think they don't have to answer for anything. And that is the arrogance and the danger that we see within our families. The insecurity is so great that they're willing to sacrifice anything and everything to support what they won't look at in themselves. And so when I was young, I loved my dad, and I figure we would have gotten along great because we did have a lot in common. But at the same time, I was being positioned as the family scapegoat and sacrifice due to the envy and the insecurity. All my mother could do when she saw other people giving me attention, my whole life was to compare and then to compete and measure herself against me. And then to, hide the abuse and how she really feels. And she's embarrassed about it because it's embarrassing to obsess over someone and to be so involved in their life secretly, privately, hiding the abuse, hiding the damage, the sabotage, the collapse and control game of passive-aggressive engagement, and then turning to those third parties and getting them to participate and enable. And, it's all the victim performance and act, the fake crocodile tears and I'm a victim, poor me, cater to my sickness, my illness, and my delusion. And so you become the sacrifice because you're the object of envy that gets in the way of them having abject, absolute attention 24/7. And they're not willing to share that attention at all. They're not willing to share it at all, even for a second. And so this is the infantilization process where they parentify you and do all those things. And instead of being a support to you, you end up catering to their insecurities your whole life. And you become the, bearer of all the true, real burdens. And the narcissist goes around deliberately imploding and creating those layers of broken to put you under, to control you. And this is all I've really known my whole life. And so when my mom couldn't get me to go after my dad in ways that would create conflict and tension between us, she couldn't trick me in that way. And so even though it was heavy to deal with, the manipulation, the deceit, the acting, the performing in that victim act, he's going to do something to me. You gotta help me. You gotta do this. You gotta do that. And when we were alone, there were times when she was babysitting me that she would work on me this way. And when it didn't work, she started to work on my dad against me because it didn't work. I was too smart. She would, snap her fingers like shucks. You know what I'm saying? It was that infantile immature, emotionally immature shucks, like huffing and puffing that the stupidity didn't get over on me. You know what I'm saying? It's like, man, he can't be tricked even when he's a young boy. You know what I'm saying? So that creates the rivalry, because they're only after one thing, and that's the attention. And they know, that it's a paper tiger, that everything they built and everything that they pretend to be is just an act and a performance. And you're trying to get to the bottom of it to help them to get at the root of the problem, which is the fact that their identity has been hijacked. And the proof of that is that they never take responsibility. So there's nobody home, there's nobody there. And they just go from one role to the next, depending on advantage sake. And that's how they switch from one personality to the next. As they've copied and mimicked and mirrored all, that's good, but they never actually do the work to try to, become what they long to be. And it's truly laziness. That's what I see. It's a choice to always run and to be cowardly, to let fear have dominion over you and power over you. And of course, those unreasonable fears turn into actions, and those actions turn into punitive punishment, in terms of, you and the relationship dynamics that you've been subject to and that you've been forced under. You never wanted it to be this way, but the narcissist in your life was always nominating you to different various authorities and powers to get you run over. It's a good moral high ground to take, to play the victim to the people you love, to alienate you from those people, and to put somebody to the line and make them choose it's either me or you. And that's the black and white thinking that I'm talking about with these infants. Do you understand? We were raised by infants. They never developed, they never grew, they never matured. And so when they see us and all that God has done in us over 25 years, and they realize they can't imitate it or pretend or steal it or take the essence of what we are away. And why is that? Well, because God is showing them that the very good things that they're trying to hijack from us don't even come from us, but it's actually Him that they're envious of and jealous of in us. And it's His blessing, His promise, His attitude, His love, His patience, His kindness, His forgiveness. And so when we're in touch with that, and they see the disposition we have of, even suffering joyfully, even when we had nothing, they were still coming after us because of this simple fact of the depth of the treasure that God has put in us. And so they still came after us, even when we had nothing, even when we were homeless, even when we didn't have a car, even when we didn't have a job, even when we didn't have a place to live. And remember, Jesus had no place to lay His head. So this is identification. You start to identify and share in the intimacy of this process of you getting to know Jesus in that intimate way, where you start to take on His likeness and go through the process of what He went through. And it's just, we see so much of Christ taking shape in us and coming alive in us. And the evidence of that is that our life starts to become way more prophetic, because we can see that the members of our own household have become our worst enemies. And not because of anything we've done, but they've called evil for good and good for evil and put light for dark and dark for light. They have become reprobate. They no longer can, test reality correctly to discern what's real and what's not real. And this inability to test reality and to analyze the quality of something is something that happens when you become dumbed down, when you become chemically castrated, when you don't stop eating the bad food and you don't stop going through the drive-thru at McDonald's. I remember how many years my dad would just laugh at me, and I'm in tears like, Dad, I just don't want you to, get cancer from eating this. Oh, cancer, that's crazy. He's at it again, My dad would say, he's at it again. I mean, you know what I mean? And he'd shake his head like that and roll his eyes and just, can you believe this? He would say, can you believe this? My dad, he would get in his zero gravity chair and lean back in the sun. And one day I came out and I was on vacation visiting him at his vacation house. And, he's laying in his zero gravity chair. And I come around the corner and his head is literally like this far from the smart meter that was on a post in the backyard. And I look at him and I say, oh, well, no wonder you got the brain tumor. No wonder you had to go through all that, because if you just took a radiation meter and you stuck it up to that smart meter, you would realize what you're doing to yourself. But it's this self-harming conditioning that has been done to all our families, and we have to sit back and watch the brainwashing and the self-harm and the self-mutilation and the hopelessness and the turning to false solutions for, problems, and, not realizing that we are all under the Hegelian dialectic, and it is problem, reaction, solution, and the ones running things, they create the problems, and then they pose as the savior to the very problems they create and socially engineer all of us. And he couldn't get that in his mind. He couldn't stop worshiping authority, and he couldn't stop worshiping what the doctors said during the time that he had cancer, during the time that he had these brain tumors, and would take all their treatments and do whatever they said without question. And I remember coming to him so many times and saying, Dad, just stop sleeping next to the smart meter and taking a nap for a couple hours, because it's gonna give you so much radiation to your brain. Do you understand that? But it's the pain of having to watch ignorance when ignorance fights intelligently, so to speak. When it thinks it's intelligent, they profess themselves to be wise, but they're really fools, They're really fools. So, but my dad felt that through the manipulation of my mom and her playing the victim of me, just making up drama and chaos, unfounded, singling me out to scapegoat me, would throw me under the bus between me and my dad would think he needed to save my mom and protect my mom. And so that is what tricked him in how she manipulated his basic instincts against her own son in this cruel game, and would sit back behind my dad and smirk and smile and give the pleasure smile when my dad was getting physical with me, thinking he was saving my mom, thinking, that the act and the performance and the mask of sanity was real, even though it was diabolical. He couldn't see the performance. He couldn't see the pretend act. He couldn't get his mind around the fake crocodile tears, the need for such attention, and the black hole of insecurity that demands a sacrifice. And I just so happened to be the one that was offered up on the altar of her ego. And I became the fuel to fuel this fantasy that kept her farther and farther away from reality and herself, using the bad reactions as evidence to justify the collapse in control and the abuse and the lies and the cheating and the stealing and the putting you in the middle and the competition over resources, the competition over friends, the competition over individuality, independence, and separateness, which was punished in my family. That separateness. And my family was willing to do and say whatever it took to maintain that control, to have the excuse and the justification to be cruel, because after all, I deserved it. And this is their rationality, even though there's no evidence or proof of, me doing anything other than reacting bad with self-esteem that God has given me, even at a young age. Reacting healthy was reinterpreted as mental illness And they ran with it. And they used it every opportunity they could as I grew with the Lord, as I gave my life to Christ 25 years ago. It was really interesting because all that was interpreted as is you're mentally ill and crazy and you're delusional. Can you believe he actually believes in God? Can you believe that he's saying that God forgave him and loves him and wants a plan and a purpose and a hope and a future for him? I mean, but they set your value, and then they set you up into situations that are extremely painful, and you're made to compete over the attention, even though that's not what you want to live for. They do, and they force you to play the game. And when they collapse all the exit roads, it's done intentionally to escalate the bad reactions, to give them more strength and fuel and power at your expense. So my dad would come home from work in the middle of the day and think he was saving my mom as he put me in headlocks. He would get on top of my chest on the ground and take my head and grab my hair and smash my head into the ground over and over. I mean, this is all justified. It was the reactive abuse that my whole family would coordinate and organize together in order to get that bad reaction and then justify it and rationalize it and excuse it. And, when you call it out, it's you're crazy, you're mentally ill, there's something wrong with you, you don't see clearly. How many times have we been told we don't see clearly? We're just not wise enough to understand that, these people have taken the word love and turned it into, abuse. And that's their definition of love. And that's how corrupt they are. We're doing this for your own good. I mean, after all, why not torture you and use abuse tactics of control and abuse that are horrific for 25 years? To have a say in somebody's life, to have dominion and power, and to feel like you've conquered something. And it is this delusion of superiority complex that they always need to demonstrate. And normal people don't need to demonstrate and put you in a position and take the action required to bring about the pain and the harm and the suffering and the bad reactions that they need to live. So I just wanted to say that with this situation, my dad would get very physical with me and put me in headlocks. And even to this day, let's just put it this way, that my neck at my C4 vertebrae has been, damaged from all the different times I was put in headlocks. And so it was, I remember times where my arms would be flailing and I couldn't breathe, obviously. And my dad felt like he couldn't let go. And it was closed fists. It was very aggressive. I remember times when I was young being picked up by my ankles upside down and thrown into my room, just thrown into my room. One time, my mom picked up a stool that she made for me, a wood stool, and threw it right at my head. So it was all justified because I deserved it. And this brainwashing and this tactic of abuse and control undermines your self-esteem and security, and you never will trust your intuition, your own thoughts and experience, because all that is undermined. All that is robbed from you because they have to impose this reality that you don't exist. And it's all a game to eliminate your ability to be a person. And so lots of us as targeted individuals have been going through this dynamic since we were young. And even though our parents were this way, and like I said, there's a lot of good things too. I mean, I'm not just trying to be negative here about the experience, but we can't heal it unless we talk about it, unless you become aware and have the knowledge and are willing to look at and go towards the worst pain in your heart. And it typically is the way God works, where that biggest weakness you have and the biggest pain you have will become your greatest strength. And you know how it is when you're in addiction, when you're in pain and suffering, and the only care you've received from others is a setup to get a bad reaction and a predatory thing where your vulnerabilities are being taken advantage of, not supported, not loved, not helped, not cared for, but they see it as an opportunity to bring about a deeper breakdown. And that is what we've experienced our whole lives. So guys, I just wanted to say, for many of you out there that have been targeted individuals, we see the parallels between how we were raised, the setups, the putting us in bad situations, the triangulation of getting other people to do their dirty work and abuse so they can hide behind that wall and barrier of people that they've convinced to go after you, to hurt you, to harm you for them. And it's just amazing how God brings you all the way back to your childhood, and you see this pattern of reactive abuse and the setups and the manipulation and the lies and the sabotage and the undermining and the competition and the insecurity and the willingness to sacrifice what you love and are attached to because of the sadistic nature that these people have. They like watching you hurt. That's family and friends. That's what they become. They like watching you lose. They like watching you in pain. They like watching the breakdown. And they like watching it because it makes them feel better about themselves. And so when there's nothing going on in your life, look out. Because for many of us, we have these people that are obsessed. And they hide their obsession. They conceal it from everybody else. And they are at war with us in many, many ways and means, without a cause and without a reason, just because of the infantile envy. And that's the bottom line. It's nothing more than jealousy and envy and a lack of development. And we can't live under the lies and the stories and the narratives that are not true. We can't placate to that, and God doesn't want us to placate to that. God's will and his truth will be known and will come out, and those hidden and secret elements that the narcissist has tried to hide their whole lives, that cloak is being stripped off of them right now. And God hears our prayers. God knows we're suffering. God knows we've been alone, isolated. God knows what these people who have slandered us have employed against us. They sit back and start making the snowball, and then they make a bunch of snowballs at the top of the hill, and then they start pushing them down one by one to make you scramble, to create the emergency, to create the crisis, to create the ambush, to create the surprise attack. So it is imperative to understand the psychology, not only of our family members who participated in the targeting and the abuse over the years, but to understand the psychology behind your customized abuse that's being done to you in this torture campaign, where those past hurts and wounds are piggybacked off of as they try to drive the vulnerability deeper and make it bigger. That is what our enemies try to do. And it doesn't work because we're healing in Christ Jesus, and we can do all things through Christ who strengthens us. So we're really making a transfer from our own resources, our mind, will, and emotion, over to the Spirit. In a practical, subjective way, we are making a transfer. We see where we end and he begins. And that is what God has done in all of this suffering and furnace and fire of affliction. And they got to see that what they were trying to steal, what they were trying to take, was actually the gift of God. And they thought they could buy it with money. They thought they could take it. They thought they could steal it for their own. And God stepped in and said, this is me that you're dealing with. You know what I'm saying? It's like the kindness, the patience, the long suffering, the joy in suffering. They just look at you and say, I don't understand how we can't get this guy down. I don't understand why we can't get under his skin. And we've tried everything. And they just don't realize the longing that we have in our hearts to just please surrender. You don't want to go down this road where you're pretending to be something that you're not. Please surrender to the Lord and give him that fight inside of you that only amounts to destruction and ruin and harm, and the evidence and the environment and the consequences and the facts clearly bear that out. And yet all they want to do is say, well, you're just mentally ill and crazy. And to get that going and to get that believable, they set you up to try to get a breakdown, to cause the pain, to get the bad reaction so they can say, see, I told you he was crazy. But that doesn't work anymore. And so we just have to press forward, guys. And I just want to say thanks for being here. I just wanted to welcome all my new subscribers, and we're just moving forward. This is a real channel. We're not here for the trends. We're not here to make money. We're not here to, follow a topic. This is our lives. This is what we're sharing for the people that are out there that are really hurting and suffering big time and understand what I'm talking about. It sounds like a foreign language to most people because they have, been willfully ignorant and have blinded themselves in denial, because who could live with themselves doing this to family and friends? And so they have to dislocate themselves from themselves, basically. And that's minus the technology that also dislocates our family members from themselves. They are hijacked and controlled robots being used as weapon systems against us. And that is not fictional. That is not something that is fable. The people around us have been weaponized as human prison bars and portals of darkness to bring hell upon us. And it's all about robbing us of the approval that we have in Christ. They just want to rob that from you and take that from you. And God's saying, I've selected him. I've chosen him. Get your hands off him. He's my property. Don't touch him. Don't even think about touching him. That's what God is doing in his judgment and in his actions. His thoughts are revealed to our family members. We just have to maintain and abide and stay with him and walk with him, calling on his name, spending time alone with him, and enjoying him. And as we're enjoying him, he moves in to handle our family. Believe me. I love you guys. God bless. And it's on and on with, these people in our lives that have been strategically placed there. It's like we got handlers in our lives. You know what I'm saying? That's what it feels like. And, the narcissist is always working to starve you of what you need. And it's all about, creating that desperation so that, you are fighting for your survival at the same time. You're fighting for your survival. You're made to cater to the mess that the narcissist makes and tries to put on you. So there are people who don't, just refuse to help. They refuse to pass along any relevant information that you would need to survive. And that's what I address when I bring up my family and parents, like just growing up. Guys, my whole life, it was just about me focusing on survival with these manufactured collapse and control games being played over the resources. I didn't deserve to have the basic and common resources as a form of punishment. It's the extremity of what my family did to to that level and to permanently punish me, to permanently reroute my course in life. So there was really no restraint, and the punishment never matches what really occurs or happens, as we well know. It's all sensationalized in a performance as the narcissist pushes and pushes and pushes, using abuse and hiding the abuse until they get the reaction they want. And with the neglect that I speak about, it's not because they forgot. It's not because they're too busy. But because withholding in their infantile nature is really their favorite weapon of abuse and control. And so I'm trying to say that the people in our lives that are perps and narcissists, they don't just block your path by accident, as we're discovering by the hand of God. They block it because they can't stand the idea of you and me moving forward, onward, and upward without them. But they don't want to do the work. They don't want to look at themselves. They don't want to, have that ruthlessness towards themselves. It's just towards everybody else as they project. And how many times has family, really been, in our lives expressing their displeasure over the progress? Isn't that strange? We make progress and they interpret the progress. The moment they sense you rising, they sabotage. The moment they see you being noticed, every single time they see you being appreciated by others, every single time they see you being loved by others, every single time. So to them, like I said, your success is a threat. Your confidence is a threat. Your joy is a threat, and your attention from others is a threat and always has been. But what they're not understanding is that the only reason it's a threat when we have nothing is because we have a treasure inside of us that we haven't recognized. They've recognized it way before we even did. And of course, they're trying to suck us back into a fantasy where they're the center of the room, the center of every conversation, and really every moment, and ruthlessly competing over that. They expect you to fuel the fantasies. Even if it costs you your stability, your peace, and your future, hey, that's part of the sacrifice for the greater good. You've got to offer up what belongs to you and what makes you you. And you have to hand that over to the narcissist because they, need it for one of their many roles that they switch to. Do you understand? So they expect you to be the one to fuel the fantasy. And that fuel is directly related to the bad reactions that they set you up for again and again and again and again, playing stupid, acting like it's not abuse, acting like it's not damage and harm and deeply psychologically abusive. They don't care if it costs you your stability. Everything is on the table to fuel the insecurity that they don't want to look at. It's a black hole of insecurity, I say. And everything is offered into that black hole. And even if it's what you're attached to, if it's your stability, if it's a relationship, if it's your peace, if it's your future, it doesn't matter what it is. It's always a competition over you achieving those things. And they hide the abuse and pretend like they're not opposing you and resisting you and coming against you. And so when you shine, they try to dim the lights. And when you speak, they talk over you. They interrupt you, talk at the same time as you. When you build, they break. And like I said, it's always going to be for these envious people a zero-sum win game. That just means you take 2 steps forward, they take you 2 steps backward, hiding the abuse and the destruction, and even transferring what they've done in secret onto you. In the eyes of others, they're telling other people you did it to them. And this is the game they play. So when you build, anything you build, they break it. And I can't tell you, even after my dad died, I was fixing the boat, fixing the golf cart, fixing the garden, fixing, the electrical in my mom's vacation house. And all she could do is follow behind me and undo the work that I was doing in a destructive, selfish, immature, infantile, competitive way because too many neighbors were telling me great job. So they're desperate, and that insecurity drives them. So when you speak, they're always going to try to talk over you because they know you're a person that embodies the truth, and that terrifies them. So they have to make sure that as you build, they're there parallel to you, competing with you and breaking what you build. When you rise, then they pull away and run and ghost and vanish, and then seek to try to affect you through third parties in a negative way. And really, they get terrified. So the only thing that our parents and these perps seek after is this desperate need for attention at any cost. They're desperate in a dangerous way for validation. They're desperate in a dangerous way for control. They're desperate in a dangerous way for reactions, and especially the bad ones. And so, of course, they're going to ghost you when you need them the most. And that is the pattern that we address in our family members. As they pretend that they've sacrificed so much in their martyr victim performance and act. But really, when you look at the reality, they quit in the middle of every commitment that you've ever had. Ghosting, vanishing, and trying rather to get a breakdown. Future faking like they're going to help. In the middle of that, they collapse and drag you under the mess. And there's destruction, there's turmoil, there's chaos, there's a breakdown. All the things in the narcissist's life will be broken down under layers of a mess because you're supposed to enter into their life and start to cater to them right off the bat. That's why they never fix anything and just leave things under layers of broken, because they've hijacked the proper use of those things, whether a car, a house, it doesn't matter. It is not interpreted by them like a normal human being would say that's for a proper use. Like that car is for a proper use. It's not to be used in some sacrifice game, offering it up and destabilizing and damaging and manipulating and lying and trying to push for a dislodgement from your connection to items and people and things, and from those things benefiting you. They'll buy you a new car, but then turn around and compete with you over the survival of you being able to own it and possess it and even care for it. The competition game is over every layer, over every move that you make to try to, be independent. So they will ghost you when you need them the most, and they will vanish in the middle of responsibility, and they will quit halfway through something you depend on. And this is what has rerouted the course of our lives for so many years. It's not that we failed or we're unlovable or too bad to be cared for, like they try to convince others that they've just given up so much and have dedicated so much time, and that you're still not better and you're still not, stable and sane. But they don't want to talk about how they hide the abuse and sabotage and undermine and destroy and then set you up for failure with these future faking games that they play. And then they stand back when everything's falling apart and watch and smirk and chuckle and think it's cute and funny and shrug their shoulders at you like, what are you going to do about it? They're always waiting for the explosion that they engineered, but then try to cover up the fact that you just spent all this energy and time in an obsessive way, in an insistent way to push to get a breakdown. And then they play the victim in role reverse and pretend that they didn't cause the breakdown. You did. And you're also mentally ill because you're reacting bad to the pain of it. Do you see what I'm saying? So they're waiting for the explosion they engineer always. And this is what I'm trying to say. Because your bad reaction feeds them. They are vampires. They have locked into the energy of the body, the brain, and literally feed off of us. And it's because they don't have God. It's a form of idolatry to, play God and then to put you in the position where, you become the object that is sacrificed to fuel their delusion and fantasy and narrative. And remember, guys, like I've said before, we're not dealing with normal people here as our perps. The pain entertains them. Okay, I just wanted to say that to be clear. The pain entertains them. And so this is who we're dealing with. They need you to break so they can feel whole. And this is what our complaint has been our whole life. They need you to take the loss, you to be the scapegoat, you to bear the consequences. And they go around deliberately, intentionally, and fervently damaging things so they can transfer it on you. They need you to fall so they can feel tall. They need you to lose so they can pretend they're winning. And all in a fantasy. It's all a disconnected delusion and fantasy and delusional grandiosity. And the moment they see you loving others and others loving you, or enjoying you, or supporting you, or paying attention to you on any level, they panic. They start biting their nails. They start huffing and puffing. They start plotting. They start scheming. They start sabotaging. They sacrifice you to protect their fantasy. And instead of facing that fantasy like we've tried to help our family members to do for 25 years of bringing Christ to them, and bringing the truth to them to save them from their own self-destructive ways. Remember, the prosperity of fools shall destroy them. Okay? And he who hardens his heart after being much reproved will suddenly be destroyed, and that without remedy. And, it's on and on. The Proverbs are really good to read, I think, over the years to really give me the wisdom to understand, those that, lay their mouth on me, lay their tongue on me in an abusive, slanderous, insistent way. So here you are living your life, but it's interfered with and blocked and stopped because you don't exist to the narcissist. That's their mentality. They don't want you to exist because you become the one thing that they can't control. So they sacrifice you to protect their fantasy, guys. And really the truth that they can't stand the most, what I've found, is the fact that they discovered by the hand of God that we don't need their permission to rise. We don't need their approval to grow. We don't need their information that they hide to survive or to make it or to be blessed. And we don't need their validation to exist. And so their tactics get louder. And because of that, our resilience gets louder. Their envy is very sharp. It's very persistent and consistent and determined. But we discover that in God, our purpose is even sharper. And so their fantasy is fragile, guys. And they're discovering that our reality is unbreakable. And this is just because we put our trust in God. And you don't exist to feed their emptiness, is the whole point. You exist to build your life and walk with God. And no amount of interruption, sabotage, or manipulation can stop someone who refuses to be their sacrifice. And you're going to rise because it's who you are just by nature, and not because they let you, and not because they helped you, and not because they approved of you. You rise because you're built for more than their chaos. And that's the bottom line. And that's what they didn't want us to discover. Anyways, guys, peace out. Messenger of the Cross, Pulse Point Media.